Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. The bandit-like dispersal of the rally in the Georgian capital takes us, citizens of Ukraine, back to 11 years ago, when the administration of then-President Viktor Yanukovych dispersed protests in exactly the same way, where participants expressed their disagreement with the authorities' refusal to pursue European integration. In the case of Viktor Yanukovych, it was the refusal to sign the association agreement with the European Union. Moreover, interestingly, just like the current Georgian authorities, the then Ukrainian ones did not speak of a complete break with the European Union, but rather that they only wanted to postpone the signing of the agreement because they consider the demands made to Kyiv to be unjustified and the parameters that Ukraine would have to adhere to in case of signing the document. We hear something similar today in Tbilisi when Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze speaks about the refusal of European integration until 2028. This, of course, creates serious problems with the negotiation process regarding Georgia's future membership. The EU. It creates serious problems with the implementation of European parameters in the life of the Georgian state. We fully understand that the government of Georgia is essentially missing a historic opportunity that arose for the country solely due to Russia's attack on Ukraine. Because if it weren't for this war, Georgia would be awaiting its candidate status for many years, if not decades, and it is quite possible that the current Georgian authorities needed exactly this, just like the then Ukrainian ones. It was important for the European Union itself to refuse to sign the association agreement. And that is why Viktor Yanukovych did not agree with the situation related to the necessity of abandoning the persecution of his political opponents. He hoped that double standards in justice would help him successfully evade the description of the association agreement and in any way shift the responsibility onto his European partners. It did not succeed in Kyiv, and it did not succeed in Tbilisi. Now everyone clearly understands that it is the Georgian authorities, specifically Bedzin and Vanishvili, who do not want Georgia to draw closer to Europe. It is no longer possible to pretend that the government of the Georgian dream is a government of European integration, while the West itself does not want to draw closer to Georgia, and therefore a course is being set for the creation of an isolated, authoritarian regime that does not take into account the will of society. At the same time, the regime of Benzina and Vanishvili, unlike Viktor Yanukovych's regime, has nowhere significant to go. Yes, of course. One can talk about the current Georgian authorities' rapprochement with Russia. But Viktor Yanukovych had no problems with Moscow at all. He was a classic Russian agent and sincerely believed that his country should be within the Kremlin's sphere of influence. At that time, there was neither Crimea nor Donbass. Neither were other regions of Ukraine occupied by Russian troops. At that time, the Russians were not waging their bloody war against the neighboring country and not dream of its destruction. At that time, they only wanted to see Ukraine controlled from Moscow. The situation in Georgia is completely different. Part of Georgian territory has remained under Kremlin occupation for many decades. At the same time, no one in Moscow even thinks about restoring Georgia's territorial integrity. After Russia recognized the so-called independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, the issue of restoring Georgia's territorial integrity has completely disappeared from the Russian foreign policy agenda. And one should not think that this issue will ever arise. This is also a completely real situation that must be taken into account. The only thing Moscow agrees to is for Georgia to become like Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and for Moscow to unite these three entities under one protectorate, dictating to Tbilisi, Sukhum, and Tskhinvali how to live in these Russia-oriented entities. And it is clear that in Moscow, neither Abkhazia, nor South Ossetia, nor Georgia have ever been considered, are not considered, and will not be considered as sovereign states. These are merely fragments of the Russian Empire that need to be gathered after Ukraine is finally conquered and destroyed. Russia is currently not dealing with the former Soviet Republic. This is simply because it is bogged down in the Russian-Ukrainian war. But Putin sincerely believes that he will destroy Ukraine. And in fact, the freedom of the Georgian people is currently being defended by those Ukrainian soldiers who do not allow Russian soldiers to advance beyond the regions where the Russians have entrenched themselves and are now developing an offensive. It is precisely this, and not the policy of Bidzina Ivanishvili, nor his appeasement of Moscow, that currently ensures Georgia's independence. But how long can Ukraine indeed truly defend Georgian freedom if the Georgian people themselves cannot protect it? This, by the way, is not a rhetorical question. Georgian society for many years, and what a sin to say. We, along with him, many others also believe that the Georgian government understands that Georgia has nowhere else to go, that despite all the authoritarian tendencies in the actions of Bidzina and Vanishvili and his associates, despite the obvious desire to maintain the archaic nature of Georgian society and the interests of clans that have not disappeared from Georgian political life since the first day after the restoration of the country's independence. Despite this, Georgia is simply doomed to European and, most importantly, Euro-Atlantic integration. That without an alliance with the West, Georgia will simply disappear as an independent state sooner or later from the political map of the world, and every Georgian understands this. That to understand this, it is not necessary to be Mikhail Saakashvili or Levan Ivanishvili. That this is simply the logic of the development of political processes in the post-Soviet space in the Caucasus. Now we are convinced that the current Georgian authorities do not have such understanding. That for the sake of maintaining control over financial flows. The Georgian dream, Bidzina and Vanishvili, all those who support their course, have opposed themselves to both the Georgian people and Georgian statehood, and possibly to the Georgian national presence in those lands where Georgians still live. And this is also a slight exaggeration. Everyone who lives in Georgia should remember the ethnic cleansings that occurred just a few kilometers from Tbilisi. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel. Subscribe to my social network on the channel in Patreon. Buy me Coffee Bee and Donatella, who helps to talk with those resources of benefit with the function of sponsor find some on YouTube. Unequal. Wow.